All right, final video for section 9.3. Here we're going to be using inverse trig functions. So you might wonder, what's an inverse trig function? Well, an inverse trig function does the opposite thing that a regular trig function does. A regular trig function, we give it an angle and it gives us a ratio of sides. What's an inverse trig function do? We give it a ratio of sides and it tells us an angle. So for sine, if we put in opposite over hypotenuse, it'll tell us what angle would give us that opposite over hypotenuse. Same thing for cosine and tangent with their respective ratios. They're the same ratios that you learned for sine, cosine, and tangent already. You're just plugging them into the function instead of getting them as the answer to the function. So you might be wondering, how do I get to these inverse trig functions on my calculator? Well, it is different for every calculator, but for most calculators, you'll notice above the sine, cosine, and tangent buttons, words that say inverse sine, inverse cosine, and inverse tangent. And a lot of times they'll be in a different color or something like that. And there'll be a button that says second. And so let's say you press second and then the sine button, it'll give you the inverse sine. If you're having trouble figuring this out, again, just raise your hand. Somebody will help you. I'll help you, etc. All right, let's use these inverse trig functions to solve for a missing angle. So in this case, we know our two legs are 10 and 30, and we want to know that angle there between the 30 side and the hypotenuse. And so just like before, we want to ask ourselves, in relation to that angle, what are these two sides that we have? What is 10? What is 30 in terms of being hypotenuse, opposite, or adjacent? And so here 10 is opposite and 30 is adjacent to x. So which trig function are we going to use? Tangent. And since we're trying to find an angle, we're going to use inverse tangent. So we're going to type in inverse tangent of 10 over 30. And your calculator just does the work for you, and you get x being 18.43 degrees. All right, so pause the video, try to use inverse trig functions to solve for y and for z. All right, so just like the one we just did, y and z, we're going to use inverse trig functions depending on the sides that we're given. So the answers you should have gotten would be 66.42 and 48.59. If you did not get those answers, let's talk about how we get that. So for y, we have an adjacent of 8 and a hypotenuse of 20. So we do inverse cosine of 8 over 20. You plug that in your calculator, you should get 66.42. For z, our 66 is opposite, our 88 is hypotenuse. So if we do inverse sine of that ratio, put that in your calculator, you should get 48.59.